Have you ever walked into a room where everyone decided you didn't belong before you even said a word? That was me, Alexandra, 32, humanitarian aid worker, and the unwanted sister at my own sister's wedding. I had just returned from a war zone where days were counted not in hours, but in lives saved. But none of that mattered as I stepped into the Blackwell Country Club reception alone. Every stare whispered the same thing. She doesn't fit in here, not with her short haircut, not with her simple dress, and certainly not without a man on her arm. They thought I was the embarrassing sister, unmarried, underdressed, and inconveniently independent. What they didn't know was that within hours, one of the most powerful men in the room would stand up and bow to me, not out of pity, but out of respect. This is the story of the day I went from invisible to undeniable. Not because I changed, but because for once, someone saw me as I truly was. In the next few minutes, I'm going to take you inside that wedding, inside the humiliations, the whispered judgments, and the moment everything turned. Because if you've ever felt like the outsider at your own family's table, you'll understand exactly what this moment meant. I received the wedding invitation while sitting on a folding chair inside a mobile medical unit in northern Syria. Outside, dust storms swept across the barren landscape, and inside, a mother clutched her feverish child as I prepared the IV drip. The paper envelope, pristine and cream-colored, stood in strange contrast to the chaos around me. My hands trembled, not because of the patients, but because I knew what that envelope meant. For the past 7 years, I'd been absent from birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, always somewhere between refugee camps, trauma wards, and makeshift clinics. I missed my sister's college graduation. I missed my father's retirement party. I missed the kind of life people photograph and frame. And each time I told myself, you can't be in 2 places at once. Lives are being saved. But that logic didn't matter to the people back home. So when I opened Samantha's wedding invitation, elegant calligraphy, RSVP card tucked neatly inside, I felt the weight of every absence I'd never explained well enough. And I knew, this time, if I didn't show up, I wouldn't just be missing a wedding. I'd be confirming what they all already thought of me, that I didn't care, that I chose war zones over family, that I had become too different to still belong. The truth was, I did care, more than they would ever understand. I cared enough to rearrange a critical deployment team, to delay field operations by a week, to swap combat boots for heels I hadn't worn in years, because no matter how far I'd gone, there was still a part of me that wanted to be seen, not just as the aid worker, not as the black sheep, but as a sister, as someone who tried. I booked a last-minute flight home, knowing full well I was flying into a different kind of battlefield, not one with artillery or airstrikes, but the kind where silence, glances, and well-meaning suggestions could cut just as deep. What I didn't know yet was how much that first step into the reception would reveal, not just about them, but about who I had quietly become. And that takes us to what happened the moment I walked through the doors of that wedding, alone. Let me take you there. When I stepped back into my childhood home, the first thing I noticed wasn't how much it had changed. It was how much I no longer belonged to it. The hallway was freshly painted, the family photos updated, none of which included me. My old bedroom had been converted into a makeshift office with a daybed in the corner, as if my presence had long since become an afterthought. Mom greeted me with teary eyes, but before the hug even ended, she was already scanning me head to toe. Alexandra, you've lost so much weight, and your skin, It's gotten so dark. Couldn't you have come home sooner? We could have done something about this before the wedding." She meant well. She always does. But her version of care often feels like a series of subtle corrections, as if I've been failing quietly and she's the only one brave enough to tell me. "I'm not here to be fixed, Mom," I said gently, placing my worn backpack down beside the daybed. "I'm here to be present." She sighed, the way mothers sigh when daughters don't cooperate with their image of how things should be. "There's no time to find you a proper date now either. Everyone will be paired up. Timothy's family is very traditional." I smiled politely. "I'll survive." But deep down, I could feel it starting. The slow unraveling that happens when you return to a place that once shaped you, only to realize you've outgrown it in every quiet, painful way. That night, I sat on the porch alone, looking up at the same suburban sky I used to dream under as a teenager. It used to feel like a ceiling full of possibilities. Now, it just felt small. Dad eventually joined me, 2 mugs of hot chocolate in hand like he used to bring me after piano practice. "You still take it without sugar?" he asked. "I still take it real," I smiled. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. But as he wrapped an arm around my shoulder and told me, "I see you even if they don't," I felt something crack open. Maybe home isn't where you come back to. Maybe home is the quiet recognition in someone's eyes that you've become more than anyone expected, and they're proud of you anyway. Have you ever returned to a place that once felt like home, only to realize you'd outgrown it? If you have, I'd love to know what shifted for you. Those moments change us, don't they? But that feeling wouldn't last long, because the next morning, home turned into a mirror I didn't ask to look into, and the reflection was anything but kind. Let me show you what happened when I tried on the first dress. The next morning, Mom announced we were going shopping. "Something elegant, something flattering," she said, flipping through photos of celebrities in silk gowns, as if I were auditioning for a red carpet, not attending my sister's wedding. We walked through racks of dresses that shimmered, clung, and exaggerated. Mom vetoed the first 5 I tried. "This one doesn't hide your scar," she whispered. "This one doesn't hug your waist enough. This one's too plain. You don't want to look forgettable." She didn't mean to hurt me, but every comment was another little reminder that in her eyes, I was something that needed fixing, that no matter what I had done in refugee camps or war zones, it wouldn't count unless I could also pass as pretty under chandelier lighting. But I wasn't there to impress anyone. I didn't want sequins. I didn't want to be reshaped. I wanted to feel like myself. So I chose a navy blue dress with 3/4 sleeves, simple, structured, and quietly defiant. It didn't conceal who I was, but it didn't apologize for me either. Mom frowned. "It's modest. It's me," I replied. She didn't argue, but she didn't smile either. At home, as I packed the dress into my suitcase, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My short, sun-faded hair, my weathered arms, the quiet strength in my posture that no one at this wedding would think beautiful, but that had carried stretchers, held trembling hands, and written medical protocols under gunfire. I wasn't soft, but I was solid, and maybe that was enough. Or so I told myself, until that evening when I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. A conversation between Samantha and Timothy about me, and just like that, the fabric of my confidence began to unravel. 4th ceremony of exclusion. The day of the wedding arrived wrapped in pastel linens and artificial perfection. My family had left early to help Samantha prepare. I got ready alone. I smoothed my dress, added a touch of lip balm, and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw two versions of me. The one they wanted to see, polished, non-threatening, quiet, and the one I actually was, scarred, capable, unpolished, and unapologetically alive. I arrived at the country club by Uber, the only non-luxury vehicle in a sea of German sedans and valet attendants. When I stepped out, a pair of suited doormen glanced at me with the same subtle hesitation I'd come to recognize. She's not quite one of us. Inside, Mom rushed to greet me, fixing my hair with nervous fingers. "You're just in time," she whispered, eyes darting toward the entrance. "Where's your date?" I didn't flinch. "Still non-existent, Mom." She sighed. One of those sighs that said more than words ever could. And then came Constance. Timothy's mother glided over in designer heels and a calculating smile. "You must be Alexandra. We've heard so much about your charity work." She said the word charity like it had quotation marks around it. I smiled. "International medical coordination, actually, but yes, nice to meet you too." Her gaze scanned my dress, my shoes, my hair, like a scanner trying to locate a barcode that wasn't there. Then she said something that stayed with me all day. "Do enjoy the ceremony. We've spared no expense to make it perfect." And perfect it was, if you liked precision over warmth, opulence over intimacy. I found my name on the seating chart, misspelled, and placed at a table with distant relatives I hadn't seen since childhood. Meanwhile, Timothy's cousins guarded the closer rows like gatekeepers. "Sorry, these are saved," one of them said without looking at me. I took my place near the back. The bride's sister, seated like a +1. During the ceremony, I watched the family portraits being arranged. At first, I stood up to join the photos, only to hear the photographer suggest, "Let's just get a few with the immediate family first." I stepped back, watched from a distance, waited to be called in. When they finally motioned me over, I was placed at the edge of the group, easy to crop, easy to forget. And as the camera clicked, I couldn't help but think, they've already erased me. This is just the formal documentation. But the exclusion wasn't over, not yet, because the real humiliation was still waiting, and it would come with a microphone, a spotlight, and a smile that wasn't mine. Dinner had ended. Glasses clinked. Music began to swell. And for a brief moment, I thought the worst was over. Then Melissa, Timothy's sister, stood up. Champagne glass in hand, she tapped it with the practiced confidence of someone used to being heard. "Ladies and gentlemen," she purred into the mic, "I've just had the most wonderful idea." I didn't know it yet, but the next 60 seconds would be the kind you don't forget, because they brand something deep inside you. "We've celebrated the perfect couple tonight," she continued, gesturing grandly toward Samantha and Timothy. "But someone else deserves a little love, don't you think?" She turned toward me. "Alexandra has traveled all the way from, where was it again? Somalia? Iraq? Anyway, she's here all alone, and that simply won't do." A ripple of laughter spread across the room. I froze. "Luckily," she said with a delighted grin, "Thomas Winriup is also here tonight, single, successful, and seated just a few tables away." The spotlight swung. From Thomas, to me, back to Thomas. "Come on, you two," Melissa said, raising her glass. "Let's help the lonely sister find love." Laughter. Clapping. Even the DJ joined in, repeating her call like a cruel joke. I sat still, heart hammering. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream or disappear. No one intervened. Not my mother, who looked nervously at the floor. Not Samantha, who watched from across the room, her expression unreadable. Not my father, who looked as if he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. I stood, not to dance, but to walk. Slowly, steadily, past the laughing tables, past the spotlight, out onto the terrace. The air outside hit me like a truth I'd been avoiding. They didn't just misunderstand me, they were comfortable mocking me. And Melissa's idea hadn't been spontaneous. It had been planned, rehearsed, delivered like a performance she knew the audience would enjoy. I gripped the stone railing, trying to catch my breath. It wasn't the matchmaking that stung. It was the assumption that I was lacking, incomplete, because I hadn't brought a man or a mask. My phone buzzed. Messages from my team overseas. A group of refugee children had just arrived at our camp without parents. They needed urgent coordination, medical screening, psychological support. While I was being reduced to a punchline, somewhere else, my presence still meant something real. I stepped away from the ledge, metaphorical and literal, and that's when I saw him, Richard Montgomery, standing a few feet away, silent, watching. What he did next would change everything. Not just how they saw me, but how I saw myself. Because the next moment didn't come with a spotlight. It came with a bow. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there in the soft glow of the terrace lights, hands folded, eyes steady. Richard Montgomery, Timothy's great-uncle, or so I'd heard earlier. Distinguished, quiet, impossible to read. Until now. I couldn't help overhearing, he said gently, nodding toward the ballroom behind us. That was unfortunate. I managed a hollow smile. I've had worse. He tilted his head. But not in a room full of people who are supposed to know you. That stopped me, because he was right. The worst kind of humiliation isn't from strangers. It's when the people who claim to love you don't even try to understand what makes you you. He extended a glass of water, not champagne. Clear heads are useful in moments like this. I took it, still unsure what he wanted from me. Then he said it. You're Alexandra Taylor, correct? Former medical coordinator for the Baghlan Province operation last April? I blinked. Yes. How do you... I serve as UN Special Envoy for Refugee Affairs. Your evacuation protocol from that mission. It's being studied right now as a model for civilian protection in active conflict zones. My mouth went dry. Richard continued, his voice calm but resolute. 600 civilians, 0 casualties, command-level tactical negotiation with both military and humanitarian agencies. That kind of precision doesn't happen by accident, Captain. He said it like a fact, not a compliment, like he was naming something I had forgotten was true. Inside, the music had shifted. The band was playing something soft. Conversations had quieted. I believe, Richard said, adjusting his cufflinks, that certain truths deserve to be said publicly, especially when they've been so thoroughly ignored. Before I could respond, he turned and walked back into the ballroom, and moments later, I heard the music fade. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard's voice rang through the speakers, steady and commanding, if I may. I stepped just inside the doorway, invisible in the shadows. He stood on the dance floor, microphone in hand, a room full of pearls and tuxedos watching in confusion. Many of you know me through family ties, but some of you know me by my work with the United Nations. And today, I'd like to speak not as an uncle, but as someone who recognizes service when he sees it. He turned, found me in the crowd. This is Captain Alexandra Taylor. Her leadership has saved more lives in one mission than most of us will in a lifetime. Whispers, gasps, heads turning, glasses lowering. She didn't come here for applause, but perhaps she deserves some anyway. And then He did it. He bowed. A full, respectful bow, from one professional to another, from one human being to one who had been dehumanized. The room fell silent. Then came the applause, hesitant at first, then building. Reluctant hands turned into clapping palms. Even Samantha stood frozen, eyes wide. And for the first time that day, I didn't feel small. Not because I had fought for it, but because someone finally named the truth I had been carrying alone. The applause faded. The music resumed. But something had shifted. The air, the glances, the way people moved around me. And that shift? It wasn't just about validation. It was about what happens when those who dismissed you suddenly realize they can no longer afford to. Let me show you what they did next. It was almost comical how fast the air shifted. Just an hour ago, I'd been the woman they pitied, ignored, or dressed up for a cruel joke. Now, I was Captain Taylor, the unexpected jewel of the guest list. Constance, who had once scanned me like a social liability, reappeared at my side with a champagne glass and a carefully curated smile. Alexandra, dear, we must have you speak at our charity gala next month. Your story is so inspiring. I nodded politely. But what I was really thinking was, you weren't inspired by my story. You were embarrassed by Richard's spotlight. Timothy's father, Robert, who had earlier introduced me as the one who lives in tents doing relief stuff, now wanted to discuss logistics partnerships. Your coordination sounds remarkably complex, he said, chuckling nervously. Perhaps our firm could support your work. We've been seeking meaningful philanthropic ventures. His tone said opportunity, not respect. Even the bridesmaids who had once mocked my shoes suddenly found them practical and elegant. Melissa, the architect of my public humiliation, hovered nearby, clearly rehearsing an apology she hadn't yet gathered the courage to say. And I stood in the middle of it all, unchanged in dress, in posture, in values, but entirely changed in their eyes. It was a strange feeling. Not vindication, not triumph. Something quieter, like watching the tide finally shift after years of trying to hold your ground. Michael Harris, another UN advisor who had overheard Richard's speech, approached me with a genuine smile. "I've followed your protocols," he said. "You've done more than just good work. You've changed the field. I'd love to hear more over coffee sometime." For the first time all day, I felt seen not because of who I was related to or how I looked, but for what I had actually built with my mind, my hands, and my choices. And just when I thought the room might finally leave me in peace, Samantha appeared. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped her arms around me in a hug that felt like both apology and awe. "I had no idea," she whispered. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at her carefully, not in anger, just truth. "Would you have listened?" She pulled back, eyes soft. "I'm listening now." And for the first time in years, I believed her. But not everyone in that room was ready to accept the shift, because the person still waiting to speak to me next was the one who had orchestrated my humiliation, Melissa. And she wasn't done yet. Samantha found me again just before the final dance. The ballroom had softened, lights dimmed, voices lowered, champagne giving way to fatigue. The day was winding down, but something between us was finally beginning. She stood there in her lace wedding gown, no longer the picture-perfect bride curated by our mother or the Blackwell expectations. Just my sister. She didn't start with an apology. She didn't need to. "I always thought you were just doing field work," she said quietly, eyes searching mine. "You never told us about the evacuations, about the people, about everything you carried?" I shrugged, but there was no defensiveness in it, just honesty. I stopped trying to explain when I realized no one really wanted to hear. She blinked, like that landed harder than she expected. "I did want to hear," she said softly. "I just didn't know how to listen." That line, so simple, felt heavier than any speech I'd heard all day. Because that's what so many of us carry, isn't it? Not just the pain of being unseen, but the quiet ache of being misunderstood by those we once trusted most. "I'm sorry for today," she continued, her voice thick now. "For not stopping Melissa. For not doing more. You shouldn't have had to stand there alone." I took her hand, not out of obligation, but because I could see she meant it. "I wasn't alone," I said gently. "Not really. Just outnumbered." She laughed softly, then wiped at her mascara. "You always were braver than me." "No," I said. "Just used to being the odd one out." She squeezed my hand. "I'd like to change that, if you'll let me." It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a redemption arc. But it was real. And sometimes, that's enough to start again. We didn't say everything that night. Some wounds take longer than a dance floor conversation to heal. But something opened between us. A new space where truth could live, even if it was a little messy, a little overdue. And as Samantha returned to Timothy's side for the final song, I felt the first real lightness of the day. But the story didn't end there, because someone else was still waiting. Not to humiliate me this time, but to rewrite her part in this story with something that sounded like regret. Melissa was walking toward me, and this time, I was ready. 9. The real work goes on, but now they see it. I left the wedding the same way I arrived, alone. No partner on my arm, no designer clutch in hand. Just my old canvas bag with a worn leather strap and a phone buzzing with updates from the field. There were still 56 unaccompanied refugee children waiting to be processed. Still medical kits to allocate, transport corridors to clear, translators to secure. The applause had faded. The spotlight was gone. But my work, the real work, was still there. And this time, I returned to it with something new. Not validation, but visibility. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. Emails from organizations that once ignored our proposals now came with subject lines like, "Following your recognition at the Blackwell wedding." Richard's quiet intervention had rippled outward, opening doors not because I asked, but because he named what others refused to see. Samantha began calling more often, not out of obligation, but curiosity. She asked questions, listened to answers, even joined one of our safer deployments to volunteer. And when she saw the camp firsthand, heard the laughter of children she once assumed I served only through handouts, something in her eyes changed. It wasn't pity, it was awe, and a little bit of guilt. Melissa, too, eventually offered her apology. Conditional, yes, tied to new understanding, not deep remorse. But I accepted it, because I no longer needed her approval to know my worth. At a gala 2 months later, Constance introduced me as our family's pride. I smiled, said thank you, and then spent the evening discussing procurement channels for mobile clinics with someone who actually understood the stakes. And maybe that was the truest transformation of all, because I hadn't changed. But their lens had. They finally saw the woman who had always been there, not because I shouted louder, but because the truth, when spoken at the right moment, is louder than any lie told over years. The work continued, and so did I. But something about the way I carried myself, had changed. Not heavier, not harder, just freer. And as I boarded the flight for my next deployment, This time with new resources, stronger networks, and a family that now watched with admiration instead of discomfort. I thought back to the night of the wedding, to the moment a man bowed, and a woman who had been invisible stood taller because of it. But the story wasn't just about recognition. It was about peace, not the kind that arrives with applause, but the kind you claim quietly after years of being misunderstood. Let me tell you how that peace finally arrived. 10. We don't need to fit in to belong. Months later, I found myself standing on a makeshift stage in a refugee camp on the outskirts of Jordan. Around me were rows of field medics, local volunteers, and newly trained staff, many of whom had never stepped foot inside a hospital until our team arrived. They clapped not because I wore a title or a dress that flattered, or because someone important had endorsed me. They clapped because we had built something real. Together. That night, I sat alone beneath the stars and thought about the ballroom, the chandeliers, the curated guest list, the laughter at my expense, the silence from those who should have defended me, and then the bow. But most of all, I thought about how far I had come from needing to be liked in rooms that had no intention of seeing me clearly. I used to think belonging meant being invited in. Now I know. Belonging means not shrinking to stay in the room. It means standing tall, even if you're standing alone. It means being willing to be misunderstood, until someone sees you and says, "There you are." It means knowing that your value isn't measured by your marital status, your wardrobe, or your seat at someone else's table. It's measured by the lives you touch, the courage you show, and the truth you refuse to bury just to make others comfortable. At my sister's wedding, I didn't belong, not to their world, not to their rules. And yet, somehow, I still stood, and that was enough. Because belonging isn't about fitting in. It's about refusing to disappear. So if you've ever walked into a room where no one expected you to matter, but you stayed anyway, if you've ever been the uncomfortable presence in a family full of polished silence, if you've ever had to carry your worth quietly, waiting for the world to catch up, then let me tell you this. You don't have to fit in to belong. You already do. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys like this. Stories of quiet courage, real worth, and women who rise without asking for permission.